Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 5 on Bits and Bäume's stage. It's so nice to see all of you, even though you look a bit more tired than 2 days ago when I last saw you. But I hope we are all going to look as sunny as this day when this talk is over. Speaking of a sunny day, please take care too. Do you know? Drink water, yes, and use sunscreen and be in the shadow. Take breaks, don't just run from talk to talk. Take breaks, sit in the shade, and also look that people around you are doing the same. Yes, and if you have any thoughts or comments, you can also always post them on Mastodon using the hashtag Bits and Bäume. Bäume with a E. So, and now I'm really happy that I can announce our speaker, Thomas. Thomas is mainly working with clouds and cloud security. And when he was looking for energy consumption of data centers, he didn't find enough information. So he went looking for them, and he's going to present them to us today. So give a warm applause and welcome to Thomas.
Thank you very much. So this is what I'm normally doing, Kubernetes, cloud security, and this stuff. But let's start. So energy consumption of data centers is something which is not really well published. So the data center owner are not necessarily publishing a lot of numbers. And you see there are a lot of articles, and the best ones I've presented here. And this study here is from 2020. So they show an energy forecast which is exponentially growing. And always, if you see something exponentially growing, you should be very, very careful and aware that something could terribly go wrong. If you compare the data center usage with the energy consumption of entire countries, you see all the data centers are more or less in the range of South Africa, even comparable to the UK or Indonesia. So that if the data centers would be a country, you see it's a bigger country. If you look into the German numbers, you see we are spending 16 terawatt hours on data centers. Mostly the heat which is produced by the CPUs is not used anymore. There is no decarbonization possible because it's just heat. And it is at the moment 3% of the electric power consumption. And the dangerous part is it has an annually growth of 6%. This means it will double probably around every 12 years. So if the data centers from now in the camp, if we talk again, it's a camp in 12 years, which would be 2035, then the data centers have doubled the energy consumption if this trend continues. For all of you who are not familiar with exponential growth, here is something which is growing exponentially. The first picture is just radioactive decay. So this is a chain reaction, or with other words, it's an atomic bomb. And the bomb explosion stops if all the fuel is spent or something other is limited. Another example for exponential growth is the spread of COVID. In your body, the virus load also increases in the first steps exponentially, and the limit is your body. If your body cannot provide more resources for the virus, then the exponential growth stops. The same with the population. We had this in COVID, and this is the danger of something increasing exponentially, that you simply have a limit which you don't want to hit. And here you see, this is the green curve, is the growth of the data centers predicted for the next years. And this makes it dangerous, and so something limiting will happen. We don't know exactly what. It could simply be that they go out of business because the price is too high. It could also be, it could also be that it is competing with other resources, and that simply we cannot spend the energy we use in data centers on other things. Here you see the comparison of data centers with aviation, shipping, and here it's getting interesting. It's even competing with food production. So, and the range is because the data is not really clear. The data center owners do not really need to give out the data. If you look into, if you run your data center on your own, or if you should go to a cloud provider, the cloud providers, the hyperscalers, the hyperscalers are the best in terms of energy saving because they have the biggest data centers. This is normal. And so from an energy perspective, the advice would be go to the cloud and don't build your own data center. Oh, sorry. This is obviously competing with privacy. So you have the option not to go into a cloud and have GDPR compliant co-location or your own data center, or you have to save energy and go into the cloud. If you compare another thing, then you see it's not only consuming energy, it's also consuming water. So the 15 megawatt, the 15 megawatt data center is around the energy consumption of a hospital or an almond orchard, not the energy consumption, sorry, so the water consumption, or comparable to a golf course. So if you have the choice to build a data center, a hospital, or a golf course, then it depends on your preferences, what you prefer. Data center is just for maybe computing, gaming, or for in the hospital, yes, this is just for the normal population. And this, if this competes, you have immediately a conflict. And normally, the best lobbying wins, or the best use of venture capital. And I don't know how much venture capital goes to the hospitals. If you see here, there is some number which is always used for advertising. This is a power usage effectiveness. It has been invented by Google because Google looks very good with this. And you see here, it's a number, and they improve all the time. And this number is simply the total energy consumption by the real load which is used for computation. This means if the number would be 1, then it would be a 100% effective data center without need of cooling and energy for cooling and infrastructure. And if you see the number, it's like in the, another example is if it's in the Deutsche Bahn train shows you only the speed if it's fast. It does not show you if your ICE is spending 30 kilometers per hour. It shows you if it is going with 200 kilometers. And so if you see the numbers, normally they are good. You don't ever see the bad numbers. And here is another curve which shows how Google makes it. The energy, the water consumption of Google data centers is much higher than the water consumption of other cloud providers. So, and then they compare, obviously, with others, with countries, with other cloud providers. So you should take these numbers with care, because on this scale, a renewable energy consumption, Amazon is better than Germany, and I simply don't believe these numbers. So resource conflicts, they are popping up everywhere where data centers are built. In Virginia, people are gathering against an Amazon facility with a consumption of 600 megawatt. 600 megawatt is more or less half a power plant. In Ireland, the data centers they take 18% of the energy consumption of Ireland, and the national strategy of CO2 reduction now is going to cull 65,000 cows because they want to limit their carbon dioxide production. So you have here data centers against cows. And if you remember Ireland, in my memory, Ireland was also very famous for herding cows and sheep. And comparable, the data centers are using as much energy as all the private city homes. In the UK, they have, in East London, created a big environmental opposition movement because they cannot do housing anymore. If you don't have energy for housing, because you want to sell the energy to the data centers, then this is the next problem. So always where these huge data centers come on a local scale, you have this kind of resource conflict, energy and or water. Same in the Netherlands. And they even talk about that they need more dikes so that they build higher walls against the North Sea, because if they pump up this water for cooling and vapor it, then the groundwater is sinking, and this means they need to put more energy in moving. And then the next step is the salt water comes from the ocean, and then they have other conflicts too. This is another example in the Dallas in the US. This is on the local scale is also an exponential growth. So this means typically you can compute you need between 1.5 and 2.3 liter water per kilowatt hour energy. This is typically 15 to 23 cubic meters for a 10 megawatt data center. And yeah, is it a big one or not? So I looked it up. The typical sizes of data centers start from 15 kilowatt. So this is the racks fit into a container. The typical things we have here from NTT in Berlin or otherwise are between 5 megawatt and 40 megawatt, and the hyperscalers have more or less no limit. So the biggest I've read about is 600 megawatt. And the typical water use is between 4 and 7 million cubic meters water per year. This is a medium-large city for a data center. And the first stops have arrived. So in Ireland, Microsoft and Amazon have to halt their plants, in the Netherlands too. In Germany, in Brandenburg, we had the problem that Alphabet, so the company behind Google, is not allowed to build a data center where they originally have planned it. It has now moved to Mittenwalde. The data center in Neuenhagen would have been optimal by energy usage because there is Umspannanlage, so there is a power switch station. But where they build it now, it's more or less in the middle of nowhere. And they have no use for their heat and something like this. In Neuenhagen, they have planned a PUE value of 1.03, and in Mittenwalde, they don't tell the number. And one remark, all the studies I've seen so far are before the artificial intelligence boom took off. So what we know so far is that training ChatGPT uses 1,287 gigawatt hours, so it's roughly the equivalent of 120 US homes for a single year. This means this comes on top of the situation here. So the artificial intelligence is in the training phase using a lot of energy. And here you also can compute this PUE value, and this is a very bad one. And here you have, you see what you all have to take into consideration, so CPU, RAM, and the GPUs. And the GPUs are normally very similar to the NVIDIA graphic cards you run in your gaming computer at home, and they are extremely energy hungry. So here are some more numbers. And the interesting part is here, on an average, you can estimate by the computing cost the energy consumption. So here are typical hardwares. TPUs are tensor processor units, so these are special graphic GPU-like devices for artificial intelligence. And here you see the price, and here's the equivalent for carbon dioxide in IPS. So this is an American thing. It's sometimes hard to calculate it in normal units. More interesting is a comparison with real-life situations. For example, here you see the consumption for an air travel between New York and San Francisco. This is what you normally consume in 1 year, or one US citizen consumes. This is the next step, 36,156 IPS, and a car for the full lifetime. And here, there you see the training of one model with a GPU. This is a neurolingual processing pipeline. It doesn't look so much, but you have to tune it and you have to do a lot of experiments. And this means this increases to that number which is comparable to a car in the entire lifetime. So this means training an artificial intelligence model is comparable to running a car for the entire lifetime of a typical car. Compared to that, the Bitcoin is the worst. It's a total waste of energy. It is consuming more energy than some even developed countries. From my personal experience, we had always these things. Some developers come with a genius of an idea and they want to go live in critical infrastructure, so there is no cloud involved. For example, a trading software which should be run on OpenShift. The vendor came up with 10 nodes of HBase. HBase is this Google-like database you can host for free. It's an Apache project. And then we try to measure the load and calculated the real needs. And finally, it was hard to detect the load. And this means even a MySQL database would be oversized. And finally, we could have run this on an SQLite database on a Raspberry Pi. And this means we have a trend in software that it has an incentive that the team which spends the most resources is preferred. So another experience some 10 years ago was I have automated the database rollout for a customer, and then we don't need an Oracle team anymore. And Oracle teams are expensive, but they immediately looked for Hadoop, which means they have a huge cluster solution for a big data file system, and so they could use more resources in their daily job. And this is a problem. I call it server machism. The more horsepower, it's the same as in posing with expensive cars. The more horsepower, the more important is the team. And you should rethink your big data paradigm. In most of the cases, it's completely wrong. If you have to increase the size of your data to compute it, then something is completely wrong. I've seen customers doing this. And on the other side, this idea cuts totally into the business model of data centers because they want to sell you compute power, storage, network power. And not only the hyperscalers have this problem, also the normal ISPs and the companies who do the housing. In the background, you could see one of these electric cars with which can go 1,000 kilometers without loading. It's completely useless because this is not a use case. We don't need these big things anymore. We need electric bicycles, but not electric cars. But this is not really visible at the moment. Yeah. Thank you. Another effect I'm responsible for is this so-called rebound effect. If you make something more accessible, it's used more, and then the consumption increases, and then the energy consumption also increases. I looked it up, and it is known as Jevons paradox. It was detected for steam engines in the beginning. So if the cost increases, let's say from 100 to 80, then the usage increases more than this amount of 20%. So it goes from 10 to 14 here, so this is 40%. This means if you make something cheaper, it's immediately used more. This is logical, and this absolutely makes everything complicated. If you make something easier, people are using it more than proportional. We have the same in the cloud, and my personal observation is I'm doing Kubernetes, so I try to make cloud access as easy as possible. And in this cloud access, there are hidden costs which I, without exactly knowing them, shrink. So if you can do self-provisioning, you are enabled to use the cloud, which is my daily job, or do virtualization, containers, Kubernetes, and automation. Finally, more people have access to the resources, and this means effectively you are triggering an increase in resource consumption. Even if the effective container might be smaller than the virtual machine or what you have before, finally the overall, the total energy consumption may increase. And this is a problem we should have in mind. Further problems if we don't have any transparent information on data centers. We only know roughly hyperscalers are better than self-run data centers. Here's another bad old example. So this is Berlin-Spandau. If you know it, here is the old eShelter data center. Here is the Finanzamt, so the tax office Spandau. And here is a lot of cooling devices. And on the other side of the channel, there is a coal power plant, which also produces heat for the local heat network. And they are completely disconnected. So the heat of the data center is wasted, and on the other side of the channel, we produce heat to get our homes warm. And I've criticized it even on the last Bits and Bäume conference. NTT has now a new data center in Berlin Marienpark, where they have 2 buildings and they have connected up with the GASAG. So this is they are not only providing gas, but also heat for housing and for the industry. And they have a total renewable data center with, in the final stage, 48 megawatt. The POE is smaller than 1.3, and they are based 100% of renewable energy. And this produces 29 gigawatt hours a year. So this is a reasonable solution. So at least it's not wasted, but it is not possible to use the old data centers and simply attach the heat transform. Further topics here from Germany. We have a drought everywhere. So the problem is, if I want to cool my data center with local water, I need water. And if the groundwater is sinking, I don't have this water. So Frankfurt has this problem at the moment. And they have all over reported these problems. In Brandenburg, Google had also these problems. And it is absolutely unclear if they can use it. If it is in the middle of nowhere of Mittenwalde, probably there is no heat consumer. So definitely they will also waste the energy. So this is a Google case. What you can conclude from the public available information. And they don't tell you the POE value, which means it's a bad value. Otherwise they would tell you. Probably it's in the Vantage data center location, because Google is not always hosting their own computers in their own data centers. So the new energy law, it is valid only for new data centers, not for the old one. And the POE must be below 1.2, but only from 2026 on. By the way, the POE can run. I will give an example soon. Data center must have a power of at least 200 kilowatt, which is not a very big one. It has been diluted by lobbying. 300. Okay, so it's even worse, 300. Thank you, Anke. And a lot of lobbyism took over, and they must integrate it into local heating systems, but in Mittenwalde there are no local heating systems on that scale. There is a Golem article on that, so we have this problem. And I don't want you to go without positive hope. We have the ability of building very small data centers which can integrate it in your local energy and heating system. For example, by the Hochschule Osnabrück, they have created on their campus data centers in real industry containers. So you can rack it, you attach it to energy and to the network, and then it boots. What is booting? A form of OpenStack from the sovereign cloud stack. They reported it on the summit. And you can integrate these small containers in your local heating provider. So you have, they call it near warming. It uses renewable energy. It is kind of cloud computing inside the container, but this only means everything is automated. It's done by 2 German companies. It's 100% open source and it runs totally automatically. So the only problem, if you want to drop these containers everywhere into your local heating systems, is security. So you have to build the containers in a way that nobody has access, or that it is turning off everything if somebody gets access. But this is solvable. What did they do? They have upcycled the heat to 85 degrees Celsius, which is the lower level where these heating systems accept the energy. It's scalable between 50 kilowatts, so this is a small container, and 50 megawatt, which is around about the same as NTT. It makes economic sense, they told me. Beyond 250 kilowatts, this means 5 containers or something like this. This means you have 2 gigawatt hours or the equivalent of 400 houses. But the customers want at least 500 megawatt data centers. So if you calculate this means 40 gigawatt hours, or you have to have 8,000 houses or some kind of industrial usage for the heat. The good news is this is not just science fiction, because the real estate companies are interested to build it into new housing solutions. So this seems to have a value. Another more science fiction-like project is in the tropical country of Finland. They simply have a sand battery for heat. So they heat up sand in the summer, or with whatever measure. Here they, at the moment, it's not really visible, they directly transform energy into heat into the sand. And this means, you could also include some CPU computing in the middle of this process, that you get a better usage of the energy. So this is a waste of energy in the term of, yes, it could also compute something in between. And it's called the Hot Heart project. And what we see here, it's quite complicated. We have seen this with heating discussion in Germany, where people even triggered a campaign which was more or less a psyops campaign against the green transformation of heating houses. So this is more complex, and this will take definitely longer. So in my conclusion, what we can think about, and it is a process will take more or less 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years. We should integrate data centers into the infrastructure with a POE of 1 and use the heat. And the GASAC told definitely, yeah, it's probably not the perfect solution we have, but it's better to start now than wait for the perfect solution, because the perfect solution could look different on every location. There's a lot of pressure behind, because otherwise we don't get our decarbonization goals, and this is really something we should not miss. So this was more or less the overview. I think it was not sufficient in that term that you have now a plan to do, but I think I wanted to raise at least that we have a problem here, and that there are people starting to have solutions, but definitely not final. So if you want to contact me, here is my contact data. And now we are open for Q&A.
So, thank you so much, Thomas, for giving us all this knowledge. Over there is an angel. If you have a question, please go over to the angel. You can just queue with the angel and the microphone. Okay, do we find a way to do this? Wow. Good that we stopped early. So, as we only have like 13 minutes for questions, maybe not more people queue. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I just read this week an article about the Google data center plant in Brandenburg, and they said they will not really need much water because, like most big new data centers, they have closed water cycles combined with air cooling, and then they just don't need that big water consumption. So what is your perspective on this?
Normally, this is a POE value, so normally you can get a good POE only with water, and you can exchange.
But it's still a water cooling system, but it's a closed system, so you need to fill it once, but not all of the time.
But then it's not as efficient as they would simply vaporize the water. It's simply, if it is closed, it's better than air cooling. Yeah, we have this.
But you can reach a POE of 1.2. That's possible.
It's possible, and Google has done it, but at the moment only with a lot of water consumption. And if they can be better, I think. They're happy if they are below this 1.2, but they will not go down to 1.03 or something like this. So this is an improvement, but it's not the thing they could have if they would waste the energy.
I appreciate that there are smaller options because I also don't believe in the giant solutions. One last sentence: we can reuse heat also for other things, not just for warming houses. We can
exactly.
We can dry food in agriculture. We can have greenhouses to grow stuff in the middle of nowhere, like Mittenwalde. So there are other options too. But it's a disaster that the law has been destroyed to its core. So it's not.
The problem is then every solution is individual. So you cannot simply have we use the heat for one data center and scale it and run it everywhere. You have problems. It has to be designed locally, which can also be an advantage for the local industry. But there is no single.
And if you force them by law, they have to find a solution. And now they don't have to anymore.
Yeah, the law is.
So maybe short questions and short answers, so everyone can ask their question.
Yeah. Okay. My question is in the same direction. Isn't there a law which forbids to use fresh water with all the droughts and water?
Not at the moment. So you need a license, like Tesla in Brandenburg, or like brown coal but then if you have this license, you can do whatever you want with the local water.
Hey, thanks for the talk. A question about the software side of things. As you mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities to, especially when dimensioning a system, to reduce the size and therefore reduce the consumption and make better use of the resources that we already have in those data centers. Do you think that working on the foundational technologies, so for example, building more efficient compilers with smaller software closures that end up in all of our Docker containers, would make an actual impact in the long term?
All this helps. Even better CPUs would help, you have to look into it. For example, there are a lot of comparisons that Python is inefficient, which is not true because Python is mostly a wrapper around good old C or Fortran libraries. So you have to look into your application and measure the energy. And effectively, you would need somebody in your team who is aware of this and can scale the energy load down. This is something you have to learn. It's not your daily business probably as a developer, but somebody should have this knowledge in your team, or you should have somebody. This would be my proposal.
Yeah, take it as a small suggestion for people interested. Take up open source projects, especially the ones that everyone uses, and try to make small improvements there. You can have a huge impact in these terms.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for the talk. Really interesting, super cool. A very naive question. So one of the things that we can actually do with the increasing computing demand that we will have is recapturing the energy in terms of heat. That's great, but very naive question. Do we know what the fraction of low exergy energy use of our society is? So, heat compared to electricity.
That's a good question. I have no numbers for that, but I think it depends on the climate and the local situation, effect and the isolation of the housing. So Germany is very bad on that. Scandinavia is, because it's in a tropical area, obviously is much better on that. So we have to improve on all levels. So isolation, heat usage, better effective data centers, something like this. Otherwise, it would not work.
As soon as we have to increase the exergy again by converting heat back to electricity, it becomes really inefficient. So, I mean, it's better than wasting it, of course. It's free in that sense. But this is something that I think we should look at.
Yeah, so it's not very efficient to transform this kind of energy in electricity again. This is thermodynamics, yes. The entropy is... Heat is entropy on... Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the amazing and much needed talk. I was wondering, you identified the main drivers for electricity consumption in data centers being compute power. I was wondering if storage also generates usage.
Yes, it does, but it's proportional. So you have more or less storage network is some proportional, and I did not want to overload the talk with all these details. There are details somewhere in the internet, but yeah, it also contributes.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. Are there any conflicts expected between Mittenwalde and Grünheide, Tesla? Because Tesla is also
consuming. I think the real conflict is between coal and Tesla. The coal consumption in the brown coal region is much higher. The water consumption is much higher. This has also an impact if they stop using water. In Berlin, the river Spree will go down 75%, which is more or less a catastrophe for Kreuzberg and southern Berlin.
Is it right to say the cooling is the most important and most inefficient point on data center energy consumption?
It's one of the points because it does not compute anything useful. So it's if you waste it, it's gone. If you can use it, you have a saving of some percent. But if you can use the entire CPU energy, then you have a major progress on saving energy.
So if we solve the cooling problem, we are very much better. I mean, how we can see in the comparison of Google and Microsoft. There are different approaches to cool, and this is the point on that we can work technically. And I'm working in absorption cooling using these very low caloric heat, and temperatures are about, I don't know, 50, 60 degree maximum. Yeah. And this is something you cannot use in many ways. Normally you can use waste heat, and that's why I want to ask you how you would say these kind of adsorption and absorption technologies are on the board, to solve this problem on a big scale.
This is the idea of this people. They have upcycling, so they have a heat exchange. Normally you get 35 degrees. It's a heat pump, yes, and this is a lower threshold for being useful for warming houses.
Yeah, but what we do is we use the heat for cooling in a thermal cooling technology.
If you can do that.
Yeah, this is thermal cooling. It's not the compression cooling. It's another kind of process. You don't need electricity. You use the heat to cool. The COP is 0.5. From 2 kilowatts heat, you can get 1 kilowatt cooling, and this is what I think is a very good idea. But the mainstream in this question does not see this solution in a way I would expect it.
I would look to dive deeper into that, but I have not seen it so far. It's definitely interesting.
All right. So, do you want to ask a question? Yeah, still 2 minutes.
Actually, two questions. One is, if you use the heat for heating houses, I always wonder what happens in the 8-9 months, maybe here in Europe, where you don't heat the houses. What do you do? These numbers seem theoretical.
Yeah, so ideally you save the heat somewhere in a sand and then consume it in the winter. So this is a Scandinavian solution. And this means that you need a certain scale, that you need a certain environment, and you have to rethink the solution carefully. So if Finland can do it, probably we also can do it. But at the end, you have to consider every aspect of the environment, the local situation, and so on.
And question number 2 is PUE is very much focused on hardware, right? I guess because there you can measure the energy. But as you said, you can save a lot of power by programming more efficiently. Like you had the example, 10 HBase servers versus 1 SQLite. Do you know of any measurement or metric that I can advertise my software for being efficient with?
So for Kubernetes, Microsoft has a framework, but I have not looked deeper into it, so you can measure it. But you have to also take into account that the business model of the data centers is to sell you more computing power. So they are not interested in you saving energy, they are interested in you wasting energy. So this goes into the opposite direction. And I have no idea about an incentive, how we get this together, that the data center providers help you to save energy.
Thanks for the amazing talk.
Is it a short question?
It's super short. It's just one thought on this. If they don't have any interest in defining something to measure this, we should.
Yes. Because this is your money. This is cost. This is directly proportional to the money you spend to the clouds. So.
Good. Then, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Thomas, for answering so many questions.